Juliet, what's my afternoon looking like? Dr. Pamela Winter had come back from lunch, and by the parking lot, she could tell it was going to be a busy afternoon. Well, Doc, Mr. Guthrie's in room 1, Miss Carroll's in room 2, and your special client is in room 3. Pamela stopped, looking at Juliet with confusion. I thought I only had 4 clients this afternoon. Julia Masters is coming in to forget about something or another, and Robert Townsend was... Yes, ma'am, they're still coming in, but all 3 of these clients just showed up while you were at lunch and said they needed to see you immediately. Mr. Guthrie said it was a blue feeling. Does that make any sense? Dr. Winter felt her nostrils flaring as she headed for room 1. This was becoming a problem that she would have to work out or risk much. When Mrs. Masters arrives, please put her in room 4 and tell her that I'm immensely sorry, and I will half the cost of today's visit. Until I finish with these clients, hold my other clients. Yes, ma'am, said Julia dutifully. Pamela smiled, thanking her receptionist, and heading off to deal with these 3 sudden arrivals. Juliet truly was the perfect woman for the job. Mr. Guthrie was lying on the couch when she arrived, his purple cowboy boots propped up on the arm as a look of immense dread stretched across his face. Dr. Winter went to make some tea as he lay there looking lost, and as it brewed on the hot plate, she sat down and tried to find a smile for him. Mr. Guthrie, to what do I owe the honor of having such a celebrity on my couch? He didn't look like a celebrity today. His normally pristine white hair was wrinkled, and the first 3 buttons were undone and showing a lot of straw-colored chest hair. His jeans had mud on them, like he might have fallen in a puddle, and his cowboy hat was gone. Even his loud purple boots looked muted today, and when he turned to look at her, she heard the voice of an angel calling out for help. Something's wrong, Doc. Something's bad wrong. I don't know what to do. I'm having these thoughts, and they're all bringing me down. Well, let's start with these thoughts. What's got you down, Charlie? Well, I was taking my gal downtown. We just eaten at Chester's. I was just thinking about a song I was going to write for the fall show, and all of a sudden I thought about a place I'd never been before. I was singing on a stage, and people were screaming. The lights were hot, and the music was loud, but it was good. I got done and climbed into a big fancy car, driving in some place I've never heard of. People kept talking to me, calling me something I don't rightly remember. But it wasn't right. I know my name, but they weren't using my name. I got all confused and fell down, and the next thing I know, I was sitting on this couch and waiting for you. Dr. Winter was nodding and pretending to write, but she already knew what would have to happen. He looked startled when she slid the cup of tea into his hand, but he took it and looked into the depths of the murk with his sad, sorrowful eyes. Charlie, you know who you are. You're Charlie Guthrie, the biggest celebrity in Kashmir. You're our songbird, our mountain lark, and we know your fall concert will be just spectacular, she said. And when he looked up at her, she couldn't help but smile. He kept looking into his tea, mesmerized by the dance of light. Are you sure? He whispered, the ripples sliding out as his hand shook a little. I am. Now drink your tea and get back to that song. Miss Maggie and I can't wait to hear it. Charlie Guthrie drained his glass in one long drink, but when he brought it down, he gagged a little as something thick and slimy plopped into the cup. Pamela spirited it away to the cupboard before he could come around, and when he shook his shaggy head and looked around, she was back in place and smiling. He looked as lost as he had the first time when he had stumbled from his home so many years ago. He couldn't have known the forces that looked for him, couldn't have known the people who still looked for him. But Charlie Guthrie, once the sound of a generation, was as much a part of her menagerie as the precious moments figures that Maggie loved to collect so much. Where am I? Doc, am I all right? You're just fine, Winter said. You had a momentary fugue, but you're okay now." He smiled, showing her a mouth of perfect white teeth, before thanking her and telling her to "just bill my insurance. Thank you, honey." He hummed a little as he left the office, something she knew but wouldn't comment on, and she listened to his boots clip-clop down the hall. Then she grabbed her teapot and headed for room 2. Angela Frosky was pacing the room when she came in, looking worse than she had ever seen her. Her hair was ragged from being pulled through her hands that were now clenched by her stomach, as if expecting to find something there. As Dr. Winter came in, the woman lunged at her before Pamela could ready herself for the clenching hands that came up to grab her. "My baby," she said, somewhere between a scream and a whisper. "Angela, your baby is—" But Angela cut her off. My baby, where is my baby? I want my baby, where is my baby?" Pamela Winter set her kettle down, composing herself before she put more than her hands on the fraying woman. It wasn't like this was the first time she had calmed Angela Frosky down before she shook herself to pieces. "Angela, sit with me and have a cup of tea. Your baby's fine. You are fine. And if you'll sit for a moment and calm yourself, you'll see that this is all just nerves." Angela's eyes darted around like a trapped animal, unsure of who to believe, but wanting to believe that what the woman was saying was true. Is it really okay?" she said, letting herself be led over to the couch. Pamela sat across from her, letting her fingers clutch at the side of her pantsuit top. Angela was such a strange thing, but Pamela was fond of her. This was how they had met, actually. Angela wanted to forget the death of her baby, a death that had driven her right over the edge. Her husband had been unable to help her, been unable to do much but tell her to get over it, and she had taken to wandering the streets and looking for her lost lamb. That was when Pamela had found her, shouting and walking, and took her somewhere she could get her some help. Turned out, that place had been Kashmir. "Angela, listen to me," she said, taking her hands as she stopped them from crumpling her top. "Your child is fine. Otto's in school, and Marcus is probably worried sick about you. Did you tell him you were coming here?" Angela's face had gone slack as Dr. Winter spoke to her, her words washing over the poor woman like a warm bath. The mania leaked right out of her, and when Winter offered her tea, she nodded rubberly and told her that would be lovely. Pamela smiled, taking up the cup from the nearby table and pouring it full. "Now, once you finish this, everything will be okay. You'll go back to what you were doing, and you won't give this a second thought." Angela nodded, but as the lump rose in her throat, Dr. Winter saw her gulp it back down and sigh contentedly. Pamela shook her head. Someday, she would either have to bring up her trauma or come to terms with the death of her first son. Someday, but not today. Angela looked at Winter placidly, as if just noticing her. "Oh, hello, Pamela. What are you doing in my living room?" Dr. Winter smiled, understanding that her friend was back to her usual oblivious self. "You're in my office, Angie. You said you weren't feeling well, and you came in for a little rest." "I did?" Angela said, dubiously, looking far away as if trying to piece it all together. Yes, of course I did. It must have been the heat. Thank you for letting me sit for a minute, Pam. Will you and Maggie be joining us for dinner this week? Otto's working on his rocket, and I know he'd love to see his favorite auntie." "Perhaps another time," Dr. Winter said. "But it was nice to see you again, Angela. Stop by any time you feel like you need a little rest." Angela thanked her again, wobbling a little as she rose. Pamela offered her a hand, and the woman talked about her son and her husband and how they were looking forward to the upcoming fall celebration. They say that Charlie Guthrie's working on a new song for the event. I like him. He reminds me of someone my mom used to listen to. What was his name? She said, more to herself than to Dr. Winter. Who can say? Winter said with a smile. Hopefully we can sit together like last year. Till then, Pam, Angela said, waving over her shoulder. She left then, but Winter couldn't help but see her touch her stomach as she rounded the corner. She sighed. A week, a day, 1,000 years, it didn't matter. Angela would be back, and Winter would have to put her back together again. She was heading for room 3 when Juliet let her know that Mrs. Masterson was here and waiting in room 6. That's fine, Juliet. I'm just on my way to see my last emergency. Hopefully, this won't take too long. As she went, she reflected that these emergency cases had been happening a lot lately. Some of them, like Angela Frosky, were like those cars you just knew were going to break down eventually, but you keep fixing them so you can get a few more miles out of them. Others, however, were a little more unforeseen. Many of them were old-timers, people who had been in Kashmir for years, and the work that Pamela Winter had to do on them was something else entirely. Kashmir was a special place, a place for people to escape things that were too much for them, and as a twinge of frost rippled up her arm, she stopped to contemplate who this last emergency might be. The closer she got, though, the less she found that she wanted to find out. She suddenly felt like there was something in there that she didn't want to see, and she started to turn around and go see what vexed Mrs. Masterson. She had taken a few steps away before shaking her head and heading back for exam room 6. She'd get through this. She would see this patient and be on her way. She would finish for the day and go have dinner with her girlfriend. She would go to bed on time. She would wake up, and she would do it all again tomorrow. When she opened the door, however, she felt thick tendrils of dread push through her as she saw the man laying across her couch. He was a simple enough fellow, someone she wouldn't look twice at in a crowd, but looking at him always filled Pamela with a sense of existential dread. It reminded her of a memory she had in her cupboard, a memory of someone as they watched their father die. As they had held his shrunken hand, watching the rise and fall of his chest, they had wondered if they would cease to exist when their father died. Were they real? Were they nothing but a fever dream that this old man was having before the final gasp? Would they cease to exist when he did? Dr. Winter had no father, none that she would speak of, but when she spoke to this man, she felt just that way. She felt as if she might unmake herself by saying the wrong thing. She felt afraid in a way that she had not since time was a squalling infant. I don't know why I'm here, Pamela. You're here for therapy, right? She said, taking a seat before the couch. I mean here. Why am I here in Kashmir? He ran his hand over his luxurious dark hair, staring at the ceiling as he tried to puzzle out something Pamela couldn't understand. I've been here for longer than I should have been, haven't I? Have you? Pamela asked, really not sure at all. How long had he been here? He'd been here before her. He'd been her first patient, in fact, but she did not know how long he had lived in Kashmir. She couldn't even be sure that he did live in Kashmir. She'd never seen his address. She had never seen a check that had been made out from his bank. Winter had never been paid by this man, but she continued to see him regardless. When he came to her office, she had to see him. Those were the rules. He sighed, smiling as he looked at her. Sometimes therapy feels more like talking to myself, but I always enjoy our little conversations, Dr. Winter. I know I should leave. I know things are waiting for me out there. But when I stand at the edge of town and look at what lies beyond, I can't bring myself to go. I wonder sometimes if the town would even go on if I left." Dr. Winter wondered that too. When she thought about it, she felt like doing nothing so much as shaking into pieces. "You're right," he said, getting up and smiling at her. "That's why I come here after all. Thanks, Doc. You know just what to say. I'll see you at the big fall bash, and tell Charlie not to worry. I'm sure it will be enough to fill even his blue, blue heart with joy." Juliet found her in the room a few minutes later. She said it had been nearly half an hour, and Pamela realized she had patients waiting for her. She couldn't even really remember what she had been doing in here. Was I seeing a patient?" she asked Juliet. "I don't know, Doc. You came in here after you talked with Mrs. Frosky. I don't know. You just had the 2 emergencies. I'm not sure what you were in here doing. Maybe just taking a minute to get your thoughts." Dr. Winter got up and shook off the trepidation that had been building after whatever it was that had just happened. No rest for the wicked, after all. "Have a seat, Mr. Costner. What brings you into the clinic today?" William Costner didn't appear to be a man who was used to looking so unsure of himself. He was a burly man in his late 40s, and Dr. Winters could see the scars on his hands from a life spent working. As he sat there in his plaid work shirt and Wrangler jeans, she thought he looked a little like Burt Reynolds, though definitely less handsome and more plain-faced. She had done her research. She knew that Mr. Costner owned a large ranch between Kashmir and Gainesville. She also knew that he supplied a lot of beef to the area, meaning his was not a small-time operation. His bill had been paid with a check, and he hadn't put down any insurance company, though she knew he had one. He had chosen to come to her instead of going to a therapist in his hometown. Mr. Costner was afraid that people would talk if they knew he'd been to a head shrinker, or whatever it was he called her inside his own head. Despite this, he had still come to see her, so it must have been important. "I dunno, maybe nothing. I saw something that kinda stuck with me. I need it gone, and they say you're good at that." Dr. Pamela Winter nodded, rising to get him some tea. "I'm very good at what I do. Won't you have some tea? I find it helps people relax and come to the heart of the problem." She held the cup out for him, but he hesitated before he took it. "It doesn't have nothing weird in it, does it?" Dr. Winter smiled. "It's ginseng, winter cherry, and all natural ingredients." He took it, and as the steam hit his nose, she saw him waggle his mustache a bit. He took a sip and closed his eyes as the wafted out from between his pursed lips. This was a man who clearly took his tea sweet and in a glass. Something like this would be exotic, a treat for his less than refined palate. It would also be the inn that Dr. Winter needed. "So," she said, returning to her seat, "tell me about what you'd like to forget." He looked into the tea, seeming unsure how to start. I know that something attacked me in the barn, and I'm afraid it might come back again. I've been a rancher my whole life. My father was a rancher, his grandfather was a rancher, and his grandfather was a stock lineman who was extremely knowledgeable when it came to breeding cows and horses. Much like his forebears, I'm a simple man who doesn't put a lot of stock in strange things. I ride my fence line every day to make sure that my grazing land is clear of breaks. I take my cows in when it's cold, and I let them stay in the field when it's warm. I know when to start looking for new calves, and I can pretty well tell you exactly when one's going to drop. I'm a God-fearing man, a patriot who gladly served in the Gulf War, and my neighbors will tell you I'm as reliable and sturdy as the fence post that I put in the ground. So, when one of my cows came up dead one morning, her neck oozing blood, I was a little perplexed. "What you reckon it is?" Randy asked, he and Jake standing on either side of the dead creature. Jake and Randy have been my farm hands for the last 5 years, and they've helped me with a lot of things in that time. This is definitely one of the stranger tasks I'd asked them to help with. By her markings, I thought this might be Clementine. She was a good breed cow, good producer when it came to milk, and just as dead regardless. I'd seen dead cows before, of course. It wasn't uncommon for animals to come and harry the herd, but they usually didn't do it like this. Hell, it had been years since a cow had been killed by some varmint at all. Last time had been a coyote pack that had gotten a little bigger than expected, and the game warden had put together a posse to smoke them out before they started killing people. The puncture wounds on her neck, though, made me think this was no coyote attack. "Not sure," I responded, bending down to look at the wound. It was nothing more than a pair of pinpricks, but they happened to be straight into the jugular vein. "Maybe it's one of them chupacabras," Jake said, Randy snorting as he shook his head. "Yeah, sure. Little bugger came all the way from Mexico just to taste our fine Georgia beef." I turned as the hazard sirens beeped, seeing George backing up the flatbed towards the body. The noise drowned out the farmhands as they joked about different boogans that might have come out of the woods to eat poor old Clem, and I was glad. I didn't believe in any of that nonsense. Truth is usually worse. Truth was, it was probably some weirdos or a group of weirdos who like to mutilate livestock, and I would have to be on guard for the next few nights to see if they came back. "Quit flapping your gums, boys. Let's get Clem out to pasture." Both hopped to, and with some help, and the help of the chains and winch in the back of the truck, we soon had her lying on the black metal bed. She almost looked like she was sleeping, and it was easy to forget she was dead until you looked for the rise and fall of her chest. "Bring her into the barn, George," I said, drawing some looks from the other two. "You ain't gonna butcher her," Jake said. "She's been in the sun all morning, boss, and that meat's likely—" "No, I want to have a look at her wounds. If some animal did this, then there should be sign. If someone else did this, as I suspect, then there will be a very different sign. You and Randy go see to the cows while I have a look at poor old Clem." The young men snapped a salute as they went off to handle the livestock. I shook my head as the pair swaggered off. Had I ever been so full of myself, so drunk off my own existence? I suspected that I had once, but who could remember that far back? I climbed into the passenger seat of the flatbed and rode with George as we headed for the biggest of the barns. "So what do you reckon happened, boss?" George asked, wheeling out the cow pasture with a practiced ease. I liked my regular hands just fine, despite Jake and Randy being young enough to be my kids. Jake was a good stockman, having an eye for cow flesh despite his age, and Randy was my go-to man for breaking horses. George, however, was the most sensible of the three, and usually handled the numbers and the equipment for the farm. I'd started letting the kid keep the books for the place too, and it was amazing to see what he could do with that degree in accounting. "I reckon it's people. People happened," I answered solemnly. George looked at me uncertainly. "You think someone around here did it?" "I hope so," I said, as we pulled into the cool enclosure of the barn, "'cause otherwise something bit her and sucked her dry while she just stood there." I climbed out of the truck and went to look at poor dead Clementine. She had a pair of perfect puncture marks on her neck, and the skin around the wound was stained a deep red. Whatever had done this had drained her blood, and the lack of any on the ground made me think they had taken it with them. Why would they do that? 'Cause they're crazy, I thought. They were Satanists or witches or something else I didn't know, and they'd taken the cow's blood to do something unnatural with it. I wasn't quite sure I wanted to know why they had needed it, but I needed to know why they hadn't been more than a few splatters on the grass under her. I don't understand how you could drain a whole cow with just 2 little pinholes, George said, looking over my shoulder. How do you know they got the whole cow? I asked, having come to the same conclusion, but wanting to know why he thought so. Look at his skin. It's discolored. She's been drained out, but I just don't understand how. Draining a cow like this would take days. How did they accomplish it so quickly? I nodded at his assessment, taking a knife from a nearby bench and returning to the corpse to confirm my suspicions. I ran it along the cow's stomach, the abdomen opening slowly as the guts slipped out. Not a drop of blood came with it. The organs looked oddly shriveled, oddly drawn, but still no blood came. I shook my head, making a few other cuts, but getting the same results. I don't know, I said to George, but they were very thorough. Take her to the east field, George. Put her as close to the woods as you can get her. Soon as she's off the property, the better. I watched as the flatbed rolled away, not sure what to make of all of it. The sight of the bloodless cow would haunt me for the rest of the day, and that was why I was awake that night as my wife snored beside me. It had been a long day with no answers, and I doubted I would ever discover what had been done to Clementine. The ceiling certainly was offering none as I lay staring at the popcorn ridges that hung up there. I yawned as my tired eyes begged for reprieve. Someone had killed one of my cows, drained her dry while I was asleep, and I knew that it might very well happen again. How could people have done that? I knew what it looked like. I wasn't blind to the punctures that had gone right into the jugular vein, but it was impossible to imagine something like that existing. Stuff like that was in horror movies, not real life. I yawned again, just starting to let my eyes shut as the soft noise of my wife's snores lulled me to sleep. That's when I heard the harsh sound of a cow in distress. It cut across my sleep like a razor, and my eyes popped open as I slid quickly out of bed. I considered getting dressed, but decided against it pretty quickly. I needed to be quick if I was going to catch him. I grabbed my shotgun and headed out into the night, my pajama pants clinging to me as my bare chest prickled in the slight chill of early morning. I was heading for the milk shed, but when I heard the sound again, I turned my attention to the third and smallest of the sheds, the birthing shed. When I catch the cows in time, I like to put them in there to calf so that I don't lose one to varmints or the cold by accident. At that moment I had 3 cows in there ready to calf, and whatever was killing them had decided this was the best place to find its next target. I came into the shed, gun barrel leading the way, and nearly dropped it on the chaff. What I saw haunts me even now. It was a woman. She was dressed in a sheer black thing, her raven hair billowing behind her, her pale skin nearly glistening in the moonlight coming through the nearby window. It wasn't a skin that filled me with dread, though. Her jaw was open, unhinged like a snake, and her face was strangely elongated by this action. She had 4 fangs the size of pencils jutting from her jaw. Her red eyes had turned to look at me, and I saw the blood falling to the floor as Gertrude bawled pitifully. She turned back to the cow and wrapped her mouth around the wound, drinking the blood as it oozed out. There was a shivering new calf on the ground beneath her, and Gertrude seemed to be trying to protect it, even as her blood dribbled into the mouth of this haunting creature. I lifted the gun and pointed it at the woman, told her to get the hell away from that cow. She hissed at me, sending more blood to the hay, and when she bent towards me, I'm not ashamed to say that I cowered away from her. I lifted the gun, prepared to fire, but as she loomed over me with her strange mouth opened wide, she suddenly seemed unsure of herself. She pulled back, closing her eyes as she tried to stop herself before she struck me, and then bent like a shadow on the side of a house as she folded out the open door. I sat for a count of 5, trying to get myself under control before I could get enough strength in my legs to help Gertrude. I put some pressure on the wound and it started to clot. I heard the cow baa quietly again. I sat there in the shed and held pressure on her neck until I was sure she wouldn't bleed to death, and then I rushed to the big barn to get the first aid kit so I could clean and cover the wound. Gertrude didn't like that much, but she allowed it, and as I watched her care for her new calf, I finally breathed a sigh of relief. That was a few weeks ago. The strange woman hasn't been back since. Not in the flesh, anyway. While I sleep, I dream about her terrible face and frightening presence. I awake screaming some nights, but I cannot tell my wife why. Better to keep the burden with me forever than to let it infect her too, though it threatens to haunt me forever. He leaned forward then, making a glooping sound as he pushed the black lump out of his throat. As he sat quietly, Dr. Winter took the cup and poured the lump into a jar as she always did. She set it with the others in there, and as she washed the cup, she thought about the farmer and what he had told her. Black hair, pale skin, red eyes. Curious. Very curious. Mr. Costner shook his head like a dog as he came out, looking around as if he wasn't sure where he was. Did it work? He asked, though by the sound of it he wasn't sure what it was. Yes, sir. I don't think those pesky nightmares will bother you anymore. I'd like to ask, Mr. Costner, could you use a good dog for your farm? The man cocked his head. Why, yes, actually. I recently had one of my younger ones die when a cow kicked him, and I was hoping to replace him with something a little bigger. Dr. Winter wrote down the address and a name of a client she knew who would appreciate the business. Talk to this man and tell him I sent you. I think your nighttime worries will be a thing of the past with one of his dogs watching over your property. Mr. Costner nodded, thanking her as he left. Pamela waved as he headed for the reception desk, letting the door close behind him as she reached for her cell phone. Marguerite picked up on the third ring. Hello, my dear. Is everything okay? Pamela smiled. She loved the way Maggie talked. I heard through the grapevine that you paid a visit to the Costner ranch a few weeks ago. Marguerite laughed, and it sounded merry. You must have been talking to that farmer I nearly ate. I managed to make him forget, but he's going to talk to Sinclair about getting one of his hybrid beasts. Maggie scoffed like a moody teen. I was not planning to return after being caught. Honestly, Maggie, I don't understand why you don't just eat deer like the vampires in those novels you love so much, Winter said, taking a seat on the still warm couch. Oh, this may work for the Cullens, but the deer is so gamey. His cows were raised with love, and they tasted delicious. She sounded like she was salivating as she remembered it. It's the third one this year, Maggie. I appreciate the business, but you have to be more careful. I don't know what I'd do if something happened to you. Fear not, mon cher. I'm harder to kill than that. Winter smiled. I should hope so. Will I see you for dinner tonight? I wouldn't miss our date night for the world. See you then, my love. Winter hung up and got herself in order before her next client came in. God forbid they see the slight color in her cheeks and think that she was human after all. So, Daryl, tell me about the dreams you're having trouble with. Daryl looked down into the steam, seeming unsure how to begin. It was a long time ago, you understand. The dreams? Dr. Winter asked, unsure what he meant. No, the thing that happened in the dreams. The dreams are more recent, but they're really affecting my work. I need to sleep so I can be effective at my job, and these dreams are keeping me from getting restful sleep. The steam wafted up from the tea and created condensation on Daryl's glasses, making him appear to be crying in slow drips. Let's start with what happened then. Tell me about it, and maybe we can help you forget it. If you can't remember the trigger, then the dream should stop. Daryl sighed deeply, clearly not wanting to relive it, but willing to try. Well, I guess it all started with this weird obsession I had with other people's houses. When I was a kid, I had kind of a weird obsession with people's houses. It sounds odd, I know, but I always wanted to go into someone's house while no one was there and just, look around. I didn't want to take anything. I wasn't a thief, but I just wanted to look at their stuff and see where they put things. See if they like to keep things a certain way. If they like to keep things the way that I did. And just observe things without, them being there. When people show you their room and their collection of something, or take you somewhere that's special to them, they always get nervous that you'll judge them, and to me, that ruins the experience. I want to observe these things in their purest form, without someone standing behind me to hurry me along before I start to judge them. I can remember wanting to go into people's houses from a very young age. We'd be driving somewhere or on a trip, and I would see an unfamiliar house and just wonder what it was like in there. Did they have a cupboard full of mugs like my mom did? Was there an ashtray in the living room with butts in it? What color was their furniture? Did they collect knickknacks? I would create these little houses in my mind, based solely on the exterior, and never get any closure on how right or wrong I was. I still feel that way. I still want to look, but I'm wiser now. When I wonder now, I remember what happened when I was 11, and I know better than to go snooping. When I was 11, I found a house with an open door. I didn't set out to find the house, you understand. I wasn't casing the neighborhood for a nice house to go sightseeing in. I was on my way home from the corner store with my mom's cigarettes. We lived in a small town, and Mom had bought a pack of Virginia Slims at the same corner store every day for as long as I could remember. The lady at the store, Miss Vicky, had known me since I was in Oshkosh Bagosh overalls. She knew I was more likely to set my hand on fire than smoke one of Mom's cigarettes. So when I put the Skittles and the Yoo-Hoo on the counter and asked her for a pack of Virginia Slim long menthols, please, she put them in a paper bag, along with the change from the 10 my mom had given me. "Tell your mom I said hi," she said, the bell over the door tinkling happily, and I said I would as I took my leave. The trip home was about 10 minutes by foot, and I had drunk the Yoo-Hoo in about 45 seconds into the walk. I tossed it into someone's garbage can, because I wasn't a litter bug, and had just torn open the bag of Skittles when my eyes found something I couldn't remember having seen before. I had walked this road 1,000 times, rode my bike up at half that many, and as I turned to look at the house, I don't think I'd ever seen it before in all that time. It was fluorescent blue, that weird bubble stucco on it that was trendy at the time. It had little square windows and a big metal awning over the top of each to keep the light in to a minimum. The grass was a little tall in the yard, but not unkempt. This was Georgia after all, and if it rained more than twice after you cut it, you had to cut it again. There was no car in the yard, and The whole place just looked very abandoned, and the door was wide open. I stopped with my Skittles in hand, thinking about that door and the idea of exploring a house with no one in it. I'd never been inside a house by myself that wasn't mine, and though I knew I shouldn't, I couldn't imagine another opportunity like this. This could be my only chance. My 11-year-old brain told me that. I might had better take advantage while I could. It further said. I took a step off the road towards the door, then another, and another. Before I knew it, I was in the yard with the tall, tickly tops of the seed pods rubbing at my legs. I looked at the door like it might suddenly slam shut, but with every step that it stayed open, I felt a little more confident that I was making the right decision. I peeked inside and found an empty living room with the TV playing. The light coming in through the windows was enough to show me the dingy living room, but I could tell that it'd be dark in here after the sun went down. The TV was playing a commercial for dog food, and the lights on the screen made me hesitate to enter. Just a quick look at the living room, I told myself. If someone came back from the bathroom or something and found me here, I can say that the door was open and that I was worried. That's a thing a good neighbor would do after all, and so I started quickly looking around at the small square front room. A mustard yellow couch took up one whole wall, and it looked prickly. It was like the couch in my grandma's house, the one in her receiving room, and there was a scratchy throw tossed over the back of it that really brought the whole thing together. There was a divot in the couch, too, right in front of the TV, and it appeared that someone had spent a lot of time making it. On the wall closest to the kitchen was a flimsy bookshelf that held some magazines and paperbacks on the bottom and the middle shelf, and a bunch of those weird-looking figurines on the topmost shelf. I think they were called Precious Moments figures or something, and whoever lived here had about 15 of them, that I could see at least. They had set the ones with animals in them at the front, and I wondered if those were the ones they liked the best. They all looked chipped and second-hand, none of them appearing new, and the kids they depicted looked discolored with age or old cigarette smoke. Speaking of, there was a TV tray next to the couch, and on it was a teetering ashtray full of thick yellow butts. They weren't Virginia Slims, and the filters said Marlboro on them in little gray letters. Someone had made a little mountain out of them, and it looked like if you dropped one into the opening left in the center, it would smoke like a volcano. There were some pictures on the wall, a man fishing with a kid about my age, a man laughing with a group of people at a theme park, and two men working on an old car. They looked too yellow and kind of washed out, though. The frames were dusty, and the glass looked like it hadn't been cleaned in a very long time. As I took these things in, I couldn't help but feel that something was watching me. I kept looking around, preparing to see someone standing there, watching me intrude, but I never saw anyone. It was a feeling, like when you think there's a bug on your arm, or when someone pretends to crack a make-believe egg on your knee. It's just something you feel, but you don't know why you feel it. It's the same sense that kept your ancestors alive, but it's something we've forgotten in our perceived safety. As I finished looking at the living room, no one having come out to challenge me, I decided to go check out the kitchen too. Sometimes in TV shows, people found their neighbors hurt or something, and I wondered if someone had been injured inside and needed me to call an ambulance. That was a lie. I suspected no such thing, but I wanted to see more of the house before I was discovered. I expected any minute to hear a toilet flush or hear a door close and hear the telltale sound of footsteps coming from the back of the house. They would find me in their house and ask what I thought I was doing, or I would run out before they saw me, and that would be the end of my little adventure. But I wanted to see how far I could get before that happened. The kitchen looked a little like the one at my house. The floor was covered in black and white checkered linoleum, but where ours was shiny and often waxed, this one was peeling and faded. The countertops were chipped and dull, the lustrous black formica looking greasy and sticky. There were cans on it, open cans that crawled with little white worms, and there were more in the trash. The label declared it chili, and it looked less like the kind you ate alone and more like the kind you put on hot dogs. There was a light there, a single round globe speckled with fly corpses, but it did little to reach the corners. The corners looked very dark, almost unnaturally dark, and as I walked around to inspect the little table and the mostly empty cupboards, I could feel that same crawling feeling of being watched. The pockets in here were deeper than the ones in the living room, and it was easier to believe that someone might be watching from them. It almost felt like I could see someone in the dark there, but I couldn't be sure as I looked to the next hallway and tried to decide if I dared. The hallway beyond was cast in various stages of shadowy darkness. The first few steps were shadowy, but I could see the still brown carpet that covered the floor. After that, about 5 feet down, however, it was shadowy to the point of being hard to tell what color the walls were. I could see a door midway down the hall, a bathroom I assumed, but beyond that was little more than the inclination of a door. The longer I looked, the more I could feel something staring at me from that darkness, and the less sure I was that I wanted to go in there. The same feeling I had gotten in the kitchen and the living room was back in force, and the longer I stared, the more I felt like I could see something in that darkness. It was human-shaped, though probably not human. It seemed to hang in the murk of that hallway, the dark converging around it as my eyes tried to make sense of what I was seeing. It looked, for all the world, like a child's interpretation of darkness, the thick squiggles that often decorate a picture of a dark room. I had taken a single step into that hallway, my foot seeming to be gone as it passed from the semi-lighted kitchen to the hall, and I took it back as I backtracked for the living room. I had seen enough to know that satiating my curiosity might be the end of me. I left the door open and ran for my house, not feeling safe until my own door was between me and the unknown entity that resided there. I told my mother what had happened because I honestly didn't know what else to do. Mom was an adult and might very well be able to make sense of it. She would smile and pat my head and tell me how I had been silly and that I shouldn't let my imagination get the better of me. She would explain it in a way that my child's mind could understand, and it would all be okay. Instead, she called the police and asked if they'd do a well check on the house. Mom had been an emergency dispatcher for about 15 years before finally leaving to be a stay-at-home mom, so she knew what to say to get them to go have a look. They said they would, and when Officer Buck came by a few hours later, I just figured he was in the neighborhood and wanted to say hi. He and Mom had been friends since high school, and he and Dad bowled together and were part of the Moose Lodge, so it wasn't uncommon for him to be at the house. I expected he would ask me to go play somewhere so he and Mom could talk about boring stuff, but he asked me to stay today so he could ask me some questions. He wanted to know what I had seen in the house, and how far I had been, and whether I had smelled anything or seen anything that scared me. I told him about the crawly feeling and how it had felt like someone was watching me, and he thanked me for my honesty and said that I had been very brave to try and check on something like that, but in the future, if I suspected somebody might be in danger, I should call the police station and tell someone. Mom walked him to the door not long after that, and they whispered about something while I went and watched cartoons in the living room. I had already basically forgotten the fear and uncertainty I'd felt in that house. I was a kid, and nothing ever lasted for very long in my mind. I had already moved on to more important things, like Mum-Ra's latest scheme on Thundercats, or how Cobra was going to destroy the G.I. Joes. Mom came and sat with me on the couch then, hugging me a little as she stroked my hair, but I didn't think anything of that either. They bulldozed that house a few weeks later. I watched them destroy it from the seat of my bike. My friends called out to me, wanting me to come and ride with them, but I was trapped by the sight of that strange house as it was flattened. It was weird to realize that you might be the last person to truly see and experience a place, though I would learn I was far from the last many years later. I'd been having some weird dreams lately, and that was the only reason I remembered it at all. I walked through a house I didn't know, my vision seeming to be on rails as I moved effortlessly through the dingy space. I saw a living room with a TV showing snow, a kitchen with counters covered in dark brown juice, and then stopped at a pitch-black hallway. There was something in there. I could feel it, and as it zoomed in, I could hear a high-pitched ringing beginning to build until I finally woke up. I asked Mom about it, figuring she might remember, and she got this look on her face that made me instantly regret asking. I was hoping you'd forgotten about that. Your Uncle Buck was afraid it might traumatize you, but I told him it seemed like you really hadn't seen anything. I didn't. Not really, I said, not sure what to say. But I definitely felt something in that house, something that scared me. What was in there? Why did they tear it down all of a sudden? The man who lived there was a shut-in. He paid someone to go get his groceries and to cash his Social Security checks, and basically never left the house. Buck said when we called for a well check, they went in and found him dead in the back room. He said the flies were so thick that the EMTs were having trouble getting him out. They were in the corner of every room, and they were a real nuisance. They had to demolish the house because the room had a lingering smell, and the flies just never quite stopped gathering there. I was glad she'd told me, but I wasn't entirely sure what to do with that information. As the dreams get more persistent, I'm not sure how best to get past them, and every night it's always the same. As he finished, Daryl opened his mouth and let the spongy mass slip into his coffee cup. He sat placidly for a few minutes, blinking his eyes very quickly, and Winter took the opportunity to whisk the cup away before he came to. She added the contents of the cup to a mason jar, washing the cup and setting it by the sink before seating herself and staring at Daryl expectantly. He would assume that he was coming out of a trance, just as she wanted, and he wouldn't question much, besides whether or not it had worked. Humans were far too eager to forget the things that brought them pain in one form or another, something that Dr. Winter used to pay her bills and live very comfortably. Daryl shook his head 30 seconds later and looked around. "What happened?" he asked groggily. "We succeeded in freeing you from your burden. Don't think about it too much. It might hurt you more in the long run if you do." She was showing him the way out when her phone rang. Winter looked down and saw it was Juliet, her receptionist, and picked it up on the third ring. She was probably letting her know that the next client was here. Business had been busy lately, and Winter had never been happier for clients to help. Rent was going up next month on the office. The summer months were always more expensive on the electric bill, and fancy dinners did not, as a rule, pay for themselves, no matter how cute your girlfriend was. "Dr. Winter, someone's here to see you. Someone who isn't on the list." Pamela furrowed her brow. Tell them that without an appointment I can't help them to..." But the door opened as a man in a dated suit walked into her office. Juliet was right behind him, telling him that he had to fill out forms and insurance papers. But Winter gritted her teeth as she told the fiery receptionist that it'd be okay. "Tell my next client I'll reschedule them for first thing tomorrow, and it'll be free." "Free?" Juliet asked, looking shocked. "Free," Winter repeated. "Apologize profusely, but tell them I have an emergency that's come in, and I must take it." Juliet nodded, closing the door behind herself as the man in the pinstripe suit took a seat on her client's couch. "Such generosity," he commented, grinning hugely at her as he rested his leg on his knee. "No such luck. You'll pay me for the lost time and trade, as is fair." When he smiled again, the gold of his glasses seemed to glimmer. "How little you have changed over the years, sister." Dr. Pamela Winter shook her head, unimpressed with the so-called untouchable figure that was the warden of Stragview Prison. "I have changed much, brother. It is you who have changed little. Get to the point, please. Like you, I have other matters to attend to." Trick or treat! The screams of happy children enveloped the two as they walked up the sidewalk of Kashmir's Main Street. Dr. Winter, her costume making her look a little like a noblewoman from an episode of Game of Thrones, walked arm in arm with Marguerite as the two took in the sights of Kashmir. The main street was lined with pumpkins and streamers, skeletons and ghouls, and the smells of kettle corn and candy apples were everywhere. Swarms of children ran to and fro as they went between the storefronts, and Winter smiled as the owners filled their bags with treats. The owners of the hardware store, dressed as Fred and Barney, were handing out full-size candy bars, and Gladys Johns of the Animal Rescue had a very intricate dog costume she was capering about in as she handed out Scooby snacks she had baked herself. Everyone they passed had a wave or a kind word for the pair, and as Maggie turned her head in surprise to see a pumpkin burst open to reveal a grinning skeleton, Winter felt this was one of her favorite Halloweens in Kashmir. "This is fantastique," Maggie gushed. "And they do this every year?" "They do," Winter said. "Do they not have Halloween where you're from?" Maggie shook her head. "In the cities, perhaps, but we did not go there. Mother said it would be too dangerous. We often stayed in the forest, where we were safe, where others could be safe from us." Winter frowned. "That must have been hard." "It was, but I do not regret leaving that life behind. The cities are not so dangerous, and I have you by my side to explain these strange customs to me, oui?" Winter smiled. "Of course, I'll gladly be your tour guide for Kashmir's Halloween spectacular." They came to the general store, and Winter turned when she heard her name. Angela came up waving, losing straw from her scarecrow costume, and smiled hugely at the pair. "It's good to see you two. Taking some time off work, Pam?" Winter smiled as she cast her hand out to indicate everything. "Halloween comes but once a year." "Would that it happened more often," Angela said. "Otto's around here somewhere, too. He and Marcus and I dressed as scarecrows this year. We got some really cute pictures before we left. I'll email them to you." Pamela nodded, but it was hard to ignore how Angela's eyes kept darting around as she spoke. She knew who she was looking for, and it worried her to see her friend like this. Angela would be back in the clinic within a week, and Winter really needed to find a solution for her problem. Perhaps if Marcus could give her another baby, but more children likely weren't the answer here. "You okay, Pam?" Angela asked, suddenly snapping back. "You look like something's on your mind." Pamela shook her head, waving her friend off as she fixed her face. "It's nothing, Angie. I think I see Marcus over there looking for you." Angela turned, seeing a pair of scarecrows and waving at him. "I better go. Otto is ravenous for his treats this year. Happy Halloween, Pam. You too, Maggie, she said, rushing off towards the shops further down. Humans are so very strange, Maggie half whispered. You can say that again, Winter responded, bumping her with her hip as the two continued down the block. Winter saw a small crowd around the clinic as they got closer, and when she came to her own storefront, she had to stifle a laugh at the sight of Juliet. Juliet, what are you wearing? Marguerite asked, not bothering to hide her laughter. Juliet looked like a nurse who had been caught in a thresher, and Winter was certain that she couldn't be comfortable with all that skin showing. Reverend Dowdy, who was seated at the end of the street with the ladies' auxiliary, would likely have had something to say about it, but he would have been in the minority this year. As Juliet did a little turn for her, Winter was suddenly very certain that the men who had come to inspect the candy bucket more than once had come looking for Reese's. I'm a zombie nurse, of course, Juliet said, grinning. It's been a big hit, Doc. I've passed out more than a few business cards to interested clients. Fantastic, Winter said, though she shuddered to think what sorts of clients they would have to run out of the lobby for the next few weeks. You two heading to the park? Juliet asked. They say that Charlie's playing a free concert there before the fireworks. Ooh, Maggie crooned. I would like to see that. He is very talented and so very handsome. Now, Mags, Winter said with a little wink. Don't make me jealous. What? The dark-haired woman said, feigning a pout. Who doesn't like a little window shopping? Juliet shook her head. Well, if you're gonna make it, you better hurry. Pretty sure he starts in less than an hour. Winter bid her a good night, and the two started making their way towards Calico Park. Along the way, however, they became distracted by something else. Something that should not have been there. Come one, come all, the man in the top hat proclaimed. Enjoy an authentic Halloween fright. Marguerite turned as she heard the barker, and Winter stopped to look at the shabby haunted house that was standing in front of them. The whole thing looked very cheap. The alley between the cell phone store and the flower shop had been taken up by a large papier-mâché pumpkin, its mouth grinning openly as it invited people inside. Paper bats and ghosts hung on strings outside, and the guests walked into the belching cloud of the fog machine as they went inside. It was all capped off by a sign that promised a refund if the buyer wasn't completely satisfied, and Winter noticed that more than one person came out with a familiar look. It was terror and deep fear, but also acceptance, perhaps even closure. Winter, however, was more curious about the man running the show. She knew everyone in town. Everyone. But this man was a stranger. He was dressed somewhere between a ringmaster and an undertaker, and as they locked eyes, she sensed something not quite right about him. He wasn't just a stranger to the town. He was a stranger to this world. Maggie was already walking in that direction, and Winter allowed herself to be led. Good evening, ladies. Would you care to take a trip through my house of horrors? Maggie looked at the entrance with barely contained derision. Is it very scary? I cannot speak to the quality of the scares, my dear, but it is a life-changing and one-of-a-kind experience. How much? Winter asked, not impressed. Just $5 each, and, of course, you will be given a full refund if not completely satisfied. Winter reached into her purse and dropped a 10 in, the two of them heading for the entrance. What's wrong, love? Maggie asked. You seem tense. I don't know, Winter said, the hair on the back of her neck lifting now that the man was behind them. Did he seem odd to you? Most humans seem a little odd to me. I am not a good judge of this. They walked between the lips of the giant pumpkin, and as the smoke enveloped them, Winter coughed as it settled around her. It smelled familiar, brimstone and hellfire, and as Maggie disappeared from her arm, Winter grabbed for her desperately. She turned, but her love was already gone, and Winter spun in the dark place as she searched for her. "Marguerite? Maggie?" She turned frantically, her eyes not finding her, but she did see something in the gloom, something that confused her. It was her desk, the one from the clinic that she had sat behind so many times before, and on it was a steaming mug of what she assumed was tea. It sat placidly, the steam rising and dancing as she approached, and as her hand wrapped around the mug, she saw the tea inside beginning to churn and ripple. The cup shook, shaking Winter's whole arm, and as she dropped it, it burst as 100,000 memories spiraled from the spreading liquid. The bulbous little balls that she collected from her clients, each of them a rainbow of colors, began to fill the space, and as Winter stepped away, she heard a tittering little voice, like bugs on her skin. "So many memories, Doctor. Is it because you're afraid to analyze your own? What lies within Dr. Pamela Winters that makes her so afraid to look there? What makes you seek out others so you don't have to?" She reached behind her, her hand darting like a serpent, and as she caught the barker by the throat, his hateful words were cut off. "I don't know who you serve, you little imp, but you would do well not to torment me. Do you want to see what lies inside my head? Very well then, have a look." Winter took a deep breath, retching only a little, as she brought up a pulsating red something that bristled with barely contained energy. The barker struggled, his face turning different colors as she held him up, and as he took one big breath of air, she pushed the squirming fruit into his mouth until he took a bite. His eyes grew wide, his form trembling as her memories ran down his chin. She knew what he was seeing, but clearly it was not what he expected. He had expected her to be a talented charlatan, perhaps even a true practitioner of the arts, but as he gazed upon the smoking pits she had once inhabited, he knew she was beyond whatever small magic he possessed. She didn't know what he was, a spirit or some kind of magical creature, but she knew that he was nothing next to her, and she would not suffer this disrespect, not in her town. She would not be made a fool of on her own territory by one such as this. Snatching it back, Winter wolfed the memory down before it could overpower him, not wanting to ruin him, only to teach. I had no idea who I was dealing with. Please forgive me. His confident facade had faded, and now she saw that the haunted house was not the only thing shabby about him. Pack your little horror show up and get out of my town. If I ever see you here again, you'll be lucky to end up in one of my little glass bottles. He took his leave in a puff of smoke, leaving Winter alone in the alley that she and Maggie had walked down only a moment before. She heard a whimper and turned to her left, her heart skipping a beat. Marguerite was crumpled on the concrete, sobbing like a child as Winter knelt beside her. Mags, it's okay. I was back in the woods again. I was being hunted by the man with the crosses. My mother, it's over now, Maggie. Just a parlor trick. He's gone now." She held her, letting her get it all out as the music began to tune up in the nearby park. "Come on, let's go hear what Charlie Guthrie's written for the occasion and forget all about this." She looked up into Winter's eyes, her lips turning up as she took her hand. I would like that very much."